Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something really interesting: how educational psychology is expanding beyond what you might traditionally think. Forget just schools and textbooks for a moment.
Right.
Our source today opens up the possibility that the insights from this field could be much more widely applicable, giving us new ways to understand how learning happens for all of us, wherever we are.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the potential for educational psychology to have a much more, direct impact on how we learn and how we're taught in all sorts of settings.
Hmm.
We're diving into a discussion paper from 1994, The Professional Practice of Educational Psychology by Houts and Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
This piece makes a strong case for seeing educational psychology not just as applying general psychology to education, but as its own distinct professional practice.
Okay, so for you listening, the mission of this deep dive is to really grasp the arguments for considering educational psychology as a professional practice in its own right. What would that actually mean for how we understand and approach learning and instruction in all the different environments we find ourselves in?
Well, to understand why this is such an interesting idea, we need to look back at how educational psychology has historically been viewed. For a long time, the dominant perspective, going back to influential thinkers like William James and John Dewey, was that educational psychology was primarily an academic and research area.
Okay.
It was seen as this kind of go-between, taking the theories from psychology and trying to make them relevant to what happens in education.
Like a bridge connecting the science of how the mind works with the practicalities of teaching and learning in classrooms.
Precisely. Even early pioneers in the field, like Edward Thorndike, really focus on this idea of discovering and organizing new knowledge, specifically to improve teaching methods. Educational psychologists were seen as the experts in studying how we learn, particularly within formal educational settings.
But the picture started to become more complex, right? Our source mentioned some compelling survey data.
It did. Interestingly, even back in the early 1990s, despite the prevailing view of educational psychology as primarily academic, surveys by researchers like Kohut and Wiczersky, Houts, Alford and Kimura, and Weinberg and McGraw were revealing a surprising trend.
Okay.
A significant number of educational psychologists were already working in a wide variety of applied settings that you might not immediately associate with the field.
Like where?
We're talking about hospitals, clinics, businesses, industries, and yes, schools too, sometimes even doing similar work to school psychologists.
Wow. So even then, they were out there in the real world, not just in university offices and labs.
Exactly.
And House and Lewis argue that these professionals were often providing services that were very similar to what you'd find in established professional practice areas like clinical psychology, counseling psychology, school psychology, and industrial organizational psychology, or IO psych.
hmm And what's fascinating here is just how broad their involvement was. Back in 1977, Tatexo and Richards pointed out that educational psychologists were already consulting for businesses, industries, and even the armed forces.
Really? The armed forces, too.
Yeah. And in some cases, they were also involved in providing psychotherapy or working as specialists in helping people overcome learning difficulties in various contexts. Remedial learning specialists, they sometimes called them.
Which really makes you think, doesn't it? If the services being provided are so similar to those in recognized professions, shouldn't there be a similar kind of professional standing and recognition?
That's really the central point that Houts and Lewis are making. They go on to examine what it actually means for a field to be considered a profession. They lay out several key characteristics.
Okay, let's hear them. What are the hallmarks of a true profession?
Well, first, there's a focus on providing a service. And in this case, it's primarily an intellectual service. Professionals in a field also tend to have a clear sense of identity and commitment to that field. Crucially, there are usually specialized entry requirements involving significant training and demonstrated competence. Legal recognition through things like certification or licensure is often a feature, as is adherence to a code of ethics.
Okay, ethics, right.
And finally, professions often have a degree of self-regulation, where members help set and maintain standards for the practice of their field.
And the argument is that educational psychology in many ways already fits this description.
That's the case they're building. They point to the existence of numerous doctoral programs in educational psychology that are recognized by organizations like the American Psychological Association, that's the APA, the major professional organization for psychologists in the U.S., and the Graduate Record Examinations, or GRE, board.
Mm-hmm.
They also highlight the presence of professional societies, such as Division 15 within the APA, which focuses specifically on educational psychology. Furthermore, in many jurisdictions, educational psychologists are generally eligible for licensure under the existing, more general psychology laws.
So the foundational structures are often already in place. Now, one potential point of discussion that our source raises is the idea that educational psychologists often provide more indirect services. What does that mean in practical terms?
This is a really important distinction to understand. Unlike, say, a clinical psychologist who might work directly with individuals in therapy sessions, educational psychologists might be more focused on improving systems or organizations that impact learning.
Ah, okay.
Think about someone conducting a needs assessment to figure out what kind of training a company needs, or designing a new curriculum for a school district, developing learning materials for a specific subject, or evaluating how effective a particular educational program is.
So their focus is often on the environment and the tools that shape learning rather than always working one-on-one with a specific learner.
Exactly. But the authors are quick to emphasize that the ultimate goal of these indirect services is still to improve the learning outcomes and success of individuals within those systems.
Right.
They draw a useful comparison to other recognized professional areas. For example, an IO psychologist might design a better process for onboarding new employees into a company. That's an indirect service, but it's ultimately aimed at improving the experience and performance of each individual employee.
That makes perfect sense. The impact on the individual is still the driving force, even if the approach is through the system. Now, our source brings up Kaplan's model of mental health consultation. How does that framework help us understand the role of educational psychologists as professionals?
Kaplan's model, which outlines different ways that mental health professionals can consult with others, provides a really insightful lens through which we can see the kinds of services that educational psychologists already provide, even if they appear to be indirect.
Okay, let's break down these four types of consultation that Kaplan described.
Sure. First, there's what's called client-centered case consultation. Imagine an educational psychologist working with a teacher or a tutor who's struggling to help a specific student with a particular learning challenge. The educational psychologist offers their expertise to help with that individual case.
Gotcha.
So if you're ever in a position to guide someone else's learning, this shows you how educational psychologists approach that kind of focused support.
So the goal is to find a solution for that one learner, but the educational psychologist is working through another person.
Precisely. Then you have consultee-centered case consultation. In this scenario, the educational psychologist is working to help other professionals, perhaps other psychologists or educators, improve their own skills and knowledge in addressing learning-related issues.
Okay.
The focus here isn't on a specific case, but on enhancing the abilities of the person they're consulting with.
This sounds a lot like professional development, helping the helpers become even more effective.
Exactly. The third type is program-centered administrative consultation. This is where educational psychologists step in to evaluate the effectiveness of entire education or training programs. They might help define the goals of the program, design methods for assessing its success, and then interpret the results.
Right. Measuring impact.
So this is about looking at the big picture of how well a learning initiative is working.
Okay.
And finally, there's consultee-centered administrative consultation. This involves helping organizations look at their own structures and processes to address any institutional issues that might be having a negative impact on learning.
How so?
Well, they might conduct surveys within the organization, analyze data about how things are working, and develop models to understand the system better. So at this level, they're almost acting like organizational development specialists, but with a very specific focus on learning and instruction.
What's really interesting is that our source provides concrete examples of educational psychologists already working in all of these different ways, even back in the late 1980s and early 1990s.
Yeah, it does.
They mention graduates from Stanford working in business, industry, and education, graduates from Fordham in private practice as learning consultants, schools, mental health facilities, and businesses, and educational psychologists contributing their expertise to training in fields like pharmacy and health education.
It really highlights that the work was already happening across diverse sectors. The formal recognition as a distinct profession just wasn't necessarily widespread. And then the source introduces Tobias's concept of wellness education. What's the core idea there?
Tobias offered a really forward-thinking perspective. Instead of primarily focusing on learning difficulties or maladjustment, wellness education emphasizes how educational psychology's understanding of learning and training can be used to build skills and attitudes that promote adaptive problem-solving and personal growth for everyone.
Interesting. So more proactive.
Exactly. It's about proactively equipping individuals with effective learning strategies so they can navigate life's challenges more successfully. That's a really positive and empowering way to think about it.
Definitely. So if we accept this argument for recognizing educational psychology as a professional practice, what are the implications for how these professionals should be trained in the future?
That's the crucial next step that our source addresses. They discuss several recommendations for professional training programs, stressing the need for greater flexibility to prepare graduates for a wider range of institutional settings beyond just traditional schools.
Right, not just academia.
They also emphasize the importance of more hands-on field work and the development of strong teamwork skills.
It sounds like a shift towards less purely theoretical training and more emphasis on gaining practical experience in real-world settings is essential.
Absolutely. The authors outline 4 key components that they see as vital for an ideal training program. First, a strong foundation in research focused on the processes of teaching and learning.
Okay, the research base.
Second, comprehensive training in instructional systems design and the effective use of modern learning technologies. Third, practical clinical training that involves working with teachers and school personnel on addressing various learning challenges.
Hmm.
And fourth, which might seem a bit unexpected, training in the actual teaching of educational psychology itself.
That last one's interesting. Why is training and teaching the field considered so important for professionalization?
Well, the authors argue that by actively engaging with how educational psychology is taught, the field can better address its own identity issues and further promote its professional standing. It encourages a broader understanding of the diverse applications of educational psychology beyond the traditional academic and research domains.
Ah, so you need to be able to clearly articulate and demonstrate the value of the field to others.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. The source also touches on the ongoing discussion about potentially integrating the fields of educational and school psychology more closely.
Yes, there's a growing recognition that the traditional boundaries between what's considered mental health and educational well-being are becoming increasingly blurred.
Right.
Some experts have suggested a closer integration of these two fields, which could lead to more unified training programs and professional practices in the future.
And when it comes to the core knowledge and skills that future educational psychologists would need, what kind of foundation are we talking about?
Klaus Meyer's perspective is highlighted, which emphasizes the need for a strong balance between a solid understanding of fundamental psychological principles, such as human development, measurement, and research methods, and a deep understanding of how these principles can be applied to the design and implementation of effective instruction in various learning contexts.
Okay.
So it's not just about understanding the why behind learning, but also the how to facilitate it effectively.
So the theory and the practical application need to go hand in hand. The source then gets quite detailed about a proposed structure for doctoral training programs.
They do. They suggest a 3-tiered model. The first level would be a foundational core in general psychology, aligning with the standards set by the APA.
Standard psych stuff.
Right. The second level would be an educational psychology core, which could offer specialized areas of emphasis, such as schooling, curriculum design, or the social context of learning.
Yeah.
And the third level would be focused on specialized professional training. This involves progressively more intensive supervised practical experiences that would culminate in a substantial internship in a diverse range of applied settings, like schools, hospitals, businesses.
It sounds like a deliberate move towards a training model that incorporates significant hands-on experience, similar to what you see in more clinically oriented psychology fields.
Definitely. And they even suggest incorporating specific techniques to enhance this training, like on-campus and on-site seminars using technology for simulations.
Oh, cool, like virtual practice.
Yeah, potentially. And bringing in visiting experts from the field, providing continuous feedback to trainees, fostering community engagement, and supporting continuous learning throughout the program.
So really building that practical skill set.
Exactly. The ultimate goal is to develop well-rounded professionals who not only have a strong theoretical understanding of educational psychology, but are also highly skilled in applying that knowledge effectively in a wide variety of real-world learning situations.
So, to summarize the main takeaway here, it seems like educational psychology has a really unique and valuable body of knowledge that's centered around understanding and designing effective instruction.
Right, that focus on instructional systems is key.
And this expertise is already being utilized in a much broader range of applied settings than many people might realize. This makes a strong argument for formally recognizing it as a distinct professional practice.
Precisely. And for you, the listener, understanding this potential evolution can really provide you with new ways to think about the learning challenges you encounter in your own life and work.
How so?
Well, whether you're trying to design a more effective presentation, master a new skill, or help someone else learn something new, the core principles of instructional design, the different consultation models we discussed, and the awareness of how learning environments impact outcomes can offer really practical and valuable insights.
Absolutely. It takes the principles of educational psychology out of the academic realm and shows how they can be relevant to our everyday experiences.
Hmm.
So, as you go about your day, think about the various learning situations you find yourself in at your job, pursuing your hobbies, even in your personal relationships. How might the principles and approaches we've discussed today offer a more systematic and effective way for you to navigate and optimize those experiences?
Yeah, and what could the future of learning look like if the specialized expertise of educational psychologists was more widely recognized and utilized in all sorts of contexts, far beyond just the traditional classroom?
It's definitely a thought-provoking question. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.